right hand down, right hand down, straight back, straight back.
Yo-ho, boys, let her go, boys, swing her head round and all together. Yo-ho, boys, let her go, boys, sailing homeward to Mingulay.
Hello, great trip. All the best now. Bye-bye. Oh well, great. The end product of 20 hours sailing in the yacht Ailey. 56 feet, great comfort, sailing before the wind in the good old way. Well, a beach to myself, beautiful Atlantic beach, and above me, an unknown island. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to get up an old road.
Yo-ho, boys, let her go, boys, swing her head round and all together. Yo-ho.
This is Mingulay, the bird island, 90 miles from Oban and Ulster, right out in the Atlantic. There's only 1,500 acres of this island, and there's only a tiny hollow where man could gain a foothold. But 100 years ago, 150 people lived here, crofting in this little corrie. Now this corrie happens to be fairly fertile for a very excellent reason, that the big Atlantic winds blows the sand and converts what would be very infertile soil into soil that will grow oats, barley, potatoes, vegetables. And from what I hear, 100 years ago, these people were able to grow excellent crops. I'm told the women loved living in Mingulay, but for the men it was a very different story because they had to fish these very stormy waters. Now, it wasn't the stormy waters that really worried them. It was the fact that they didn't have any real landing place, a very vital consideration when you live in a lonely island. There were 20 crofts on Mingulay, so the families must have been large when you consider there were 150 people. And you can't understand a people until you've seen their village. And for me, this is a marvellous moment because I'm going to walk down the old road that these crofters used with their Shetland ponies bringing peat off the hill, bringing in their crops. They were great storytellers. I'll tell you some about these stories later. But meantime, the village.
We are waiting by the harbour. We've been waiting since break of day.
Oh gee, a golden eagle? That's probably the most westerly golden eagle in Scotland. The wingspan, 7 feet. You can't mistake that for a buzzard. Don't think it'll have a nest here though, but it will be hunting probably for rabbits or seabirds out in the cliffs. Yes, that's just the kind of country that would hunt really well. I know that the nearest nest here is probably just off Barra, a wee bit to the east, so maybe it's going back there. Well, that must be one of the very old houses on Mingulay. There are actually 2 villages here, and the lower village must belong to the time of McPhee. Now, who was McPhee? Well, I've mentioned that the Mingulay folk were great storytellers. And the story of McPhee is a strange one, because McPhee, who lived in Barra and worked for the laird, who was the chief of the clan, McNeil, was wondering why he hadn't heard from the Mingulay folk. So he sent a boat out, and in these days, of course, with the lug sail boats, the boat carried a fire in a black pot burning peat so that the men could cook for themselves. The boat made its way into Mingulay, but as usual there was a big swell running, and that made it very difficult for the boat crew to land, so they put off McPhee on the rocks, and he came round the corner there to the village expecting people to be welcoming him. But there was no welcome, there was nobody there. And he opened one door after another and found the same story in every one. Everybody was dead of the plague. Well, you can imagine how he must have felt going back to the boat to tell his story. And he should have waited until he was in that boat before he told it. because when he shouted out the news, they threw him a burning peat out of the pot and left him and sailed back. They didn't want to catch the plague. And of course in Barra, when they heard the story, they felt he was best left there rather than bring the plague to a big island. So here is McPhee, marooned for a solid year and a day here. And every day he climbed a hill. Every day it was possible, there might be a view, to see if there was a boat on the water coming to collect him. Well, here's the strange part of it. The island was resettled and a village built higher up. That's the more modern village. And McPhee was one of the settlers. You would have thought he did more than enough of Mingulay. He settled down. There's a lot of other stories about McPhee. This is the heart of the new village of Mingulay. The new village, because when it was resettled, they built the village further back from the old. The blowing sand is covering up the old houses, and it's beginning to do the same here. The only substantial house, the one with the orange roof, it's really lichen, kind of crotal, was the priest's house. But so far as I can gather, it was never really occupied because the people were preparing to evacuate this island by the time the chapel and the house were getting ready, about 1908. Well, it was an adventurous life for them here because you had to make the most of the short summer, and often in the winter time you'd be cooped up, and the only thing you could do, I suppose, would be do the ceilidh, tell the stories, and these stories survive because of this oral tradition which is so strong in the Outer Hebrides. I love the story of the Culloden man who came back from fighting with Bonnie Prince Charlie, and he must have thought, my God, it's great to be home in safety. But one day a big ship with sails up came in, and it was the government men looking for Jacobites, and the fellow was strung up from his own roof tree in the house. And I believe his son, who went to Battersea, used to tell the story, and he told it as if his father had been strung up yesterday. But that's the way these people talk. It's the same in the McPhee story. It comes alive. The other story, if you lost your wife, say you were a man, or if you were left a widow, you applied to the McNeill in Kishmel Castle, Barra, and he would find you a substitute. And you were then expected to take your way to Castle Bay with a bottle of strong liquor and consummate the marriage, because, as it was said, it wouldn't do if the McNeill hadn't enough followers in times of trouble. Well, only a few stories of this remarkable place. Thinking, though, of the other aspect of this island, you know, the coastline is over 12 miles. There's this tiny corrie where the people lived. But on the coast, every summer, to the cliffs, comes thousands and thousands of birds. And one of the secrets of life here was to make a harvest of these birds. And if you were a great climber, you were known as Gingich, a man of courage, a man of imagination, a man who could support the island and make it strong. So I'm going up to these remarkable cliffs, a very short walk to the head of that corrie, a climb of 700 feet, and you'll be surprised what we see there. Well, what a great moment when you come up to the edge of the green, and suddenly, as if a great knife had sliced the mountain, that cliff, 700 feet. It's one of the sheerest cliffs I've seen. That's one of the reasons why there's not so many birds on it as in many a place on Mingulay. It's still got that certain something that makes you realise while folk lived in Mingulay, there were so many songs written about it. And even when they left it, they still talked about Mingulay from the island of Battersea. Now, when the Mingulay people gave up life here and went to Battersea, they did so because they were looking for an easier life, and also here was an island that was lying empty. It was being farmed as a single island by a lady Gordon Cathcart. And they decided that since they were local people, they should have it and should croft it. They settled, they built sheds, huts, and they started to dig the land. And of course they were breaking the law, and some of them went to Calton Jail in Edinburgh and were sentenced to 6 months. But there was such a government relenting over it all, because of a public outcry, I must say, that they bought the island for the Barra folk and the Mingulay folk, and people who were land hungry were given settlements. So there is Mingulay today, a most marvellous place in the summertime, and you can get a day like today. The tremendous contrast of that beautiful sandy bay, great atmosphere, suddenly this shearing away to the vertical cliffs, and around the coast, the cliffs where the great climbers used to go after the birds. If you were the Ginjich, you could leap from a boat, climb up, take your haul of birds and back to the village, and no doubt there was great rejoicing. Well, maybe someday people will come and live in Mingulay again. I would like to think so. It could certainly support people. People expect a lot now, but people are getting tired maybe of all the thutch of living in great cities. There is plenty of peace here. It's a place I'll come back to, certainly. Mingulay, the penultimate island of the Outer Hebrides. And I came away from it with a thought in my mind. What was the catalyst that made that population of getting on for 100 or more leave that island? The usual story of an outlandish island is for the young men to leave until eventually there's not enough left to keep the island alive. But in this particular case, they all went in 1908. So, as I was moving around the Outer Hebrides, I kept asking people, why did the people of Mingulay leave? And the story I got was that they left because of the weed. Tobacco. The life of a fisherman sailing in these open boats with a lug sail is a very hard and dangerous one. And one of the great pleasures of life there was smoking. And because they had no shop nor the money to buy tobacco, they had to do without. But what about Berneray? The ultimate island of the Outer Hebrides next door. It carried its population till 1931. What a position. This is Berneray. My position here is 683 feet above the sea, the highest lighthouse position in Britain. And below me, the cliffs are plunging into the ocean. Barra Head, the ultimate point of the Outer Hebrides. That marvellous chain of very, very ancient rocks which culminate here, sheared by the Atlantic. And this light here has been shining since 1833. There's nothing more friendly than any lighthouse, but this particular lighthouse has a special connotation because it's shining out across 33 miles of ocean. The flash is one every 15 seconds. And this flash is very important indeed because there is nothing beyond here to the west except Newfoundland and Labrador across 2,000 miles of ocean. The surf here can be so tremendous when it hits the rock from the swell of that tremendous distance that small fish can actually be blown out of the water to the flat ground around this lighthouse. What's it like living here? Because very often you're surrounded by spray. The mist comes right down. In fact, lighthouse keepers seem to suffer from arthritis if they spend too much time in places like this. But there are compensations, disadvantages, and I'm going to find out by talking to the lighthouse keepers. What's your actual role here, Donald?
Well, I'm here as a principal keeper. I have 3 men under me at a time.
3 men at a time?
Yeah.
And how long do you actually stay at one time?
We do 4 weeks on and 4 weeks ashore. And our watches is we do 4 hours and 8 hours off.
And the time is coming not so very long ahead when it'll be all automatic, there'll be no lighthouse keepers.
That's true because as far as I'm led to believe, it'll should be closing round about the spring, taking all the men off by that time.
So this is the last summer then that the island of Berneray, Barrahead will have a team of lighthouse keepers.
Quite probably, yes.
How about the maintenance then? Will that just be done?
That'll be done from headquarters, and then as it goes wrong, because the light and the beacon will be monitored from another lighthouse, which is American. They can see when anything goes wrong with the light. It monitors it there, you see, and then they report it to headquarters in Edinburgh. And then they send engineers to fix it by helicopter.
Will you be sorry not to come back here again?
Well, I'm no sorry coming back here because I've not been just too fit since I came here after the last 3 years anyway. I haven't bothered with rheumatoid arthritis. It's the dampness, I blame for it. So.
You're paying for the bad weather of Barrahead?
Yes, well, I do anyway. So.
And how many years is that you've been here?
I'll be 4 years here in sort of next month, July.
Oh, I think you've done your stint, Donald.
Well, I think so too. I think so too.
Now, thinking of the folks who lived in this island, what they were farming really was a northern slope, which gets very little sun in the winter time. It could have almost none. There's only 446 acres of Berneray altogether. The coastline is only 5 3/4 miles, with very little in the way of foreshore. And in one of the earliest accounts of the 17th century, the great traveller Martin said that the natives endure great fatigue, carrying seaweed upon their back with ropes to fertilise the fields. Now, the cliffs themselves are really submerged mountains. Once upon a time, this island that I'm standing on was part of the Ben Nevis Massif, and Ben Nevis itself was continuous with Iceland and Greenland. Then came the great ice age that carved up the mountains. In time, the melting snow forming water, a slight dip towards the west, and what we had was a rift valley of ocean forming, separating the Outer Hebrides from the mainland of Scotland. So really, when I'm here on Berneray and on Mingulay, I'm walking on the top of a mountain, submerged in the sea, carved down to the very oldest rocks and fretted by the Atlantic. And into this natural fortress of rock, every summer comes these seabirds. These seabirds would nest in the ocean if they could, but as they've got to come to land, they come to where is nearest to the ocean, these tenements that rise from the sea to 600, 700 feet. It's the movement and the sounds of the seabird colonies that's so exciting. The slunge of the sea, and above it, the echoing of the kittiwakes, the choking calls of the fulmar petrels, the loud billing of the guillemots and the razorbills. Now, when you see a colony in real full cry with the birds whirring about the air like bees in a hive, they convey everything to me that the Hebrides means. And the birds themselves, you know, they've got real character when you look at them. You look at the puffin, it looks like a wise old parrot. The sea parrot's a good name for it, although in the northeast it's known as tammy nori. And the curious thing about the puffin for such a sociable bird is that it spends a lot of its summer down a hole because it nests in rabbit burrows. But it's got to come out for a wee chat, except that it's got hardly any voice. The puffin is almost silent, so it does a great deal of billing, rubbing its bill against another bird. At night, they make a snoring sound, and to walk over a puffinry at night is a great experience. You're walking over 1,000 snorers. So there's a tremendous interest in being in a place where you can watch all this Atlantic, the reservoir of life that's the Atlantic, going on. And it's no wonder that a man like Joe Toner so loves living in a place like Berneray. Well, Joe Toner, you have a great position on the edge of the cliff here.
It's a nice view.
Oh, it's a great view.
Isn't it?
How do you enjoy living here, Joe?
Well, it's a big change from the usual type of job. I mean, you're here for 4 weeks, working 7 days a week, and then you're 4 weeks off. But It's amazing. It's really a fantastic at this time of the year with the birds nesting, you know, and the various visitors, like bird visitors.
You really
Okay.
enjoy them?
Oh,
Well, I was watching you in the crags there and I was just thinking how agile you are, but you haven't spent your life doing it.
no. I've just been a year on this job. I was in the Forestry Commission for about 16 years. And, well, you're always interested. I mean, working in forestry, you couldn't do anything else but be interested in nature to a certain extent, you know.
So now it's a new kind of nature, right from the Atlantic to these dizzy ledges.
Oh, well, there's new types of birds that I've never seen before.
What's your favourite?
Oh, the puffin.
Taminori,
Oh,
the sea parrot.
aye.
Well, Joe, you're going off at a very, very good time because you're heading for Oban today in that helicopter.
That's right, aye.
Sorry to be going.
But, well, I think it wouldn't worry me if to stay and see the hatching out and whatnot.
You're going to miss a good month.
But after 4 weeks, you're always in plenty. There's always birds ashore as well. No.
And tell me what your programme today is. You're going off in the helicopter. Where are you heading?
Well, we're heading up to Roybridge first, and then on Saturday I'm down to Gilphead.
That's where you stay.
There's the house in Gilphead.
You're actually a Glasgow man, Joe, you were telling me earlier.
Well, yes, I was born and brought up in the East End, Glasgow, but I decided to have a working holiday sort of in the Forestry Commission for a couple of years, and well, I never looked back. I decided this was a life, country life rather than the city, so I couldn't go back there.
Great. You really settled down to it.
Oh, aye.
Well, this is the very edge of Barra Head I'm on now. Below me, a great drop, and although this might appear a wee bit dangerous, in fact, the holes are marvellous. The rock is very sound. It's simply a question of making sure that your feet are in a good position. And incidentally, a marvellous natural garden just below me of roseroot, bladder campion, sea pink, everything. A world of beauty, inhabited 100 years ago by 34 people who lived on the big north-facing slope, crofting and fishing. Then by 1904 the population had fallen to half that number. But the folks continued there until 1930, and then they gave up. So today the island is inhabited only by the lighthouse keepers. Great to come though and get a welcome. You feel it's not an uninhabited island, because there is something rather sad about islands which no longer carry a population. You need the human presence to enjoy even the wildest scenery. Right, well, it seems a pity that that island would have had such a marvellous day. If I ever come back to it, there'll be nobody on it. There'll be no lighthouse keepers. It'll have joined the ranks of the uninhabited islands of the Western Isles. Berneray. Unforgettable islands that haunt the imagination by their towering cliffs and these birds that come in millions to the western coast of Scotland. Probably only St Kilda has got scenery to compare with Barra Head and Mingulay.